Nate Weisberg, who needs no introduction. So without further ado, Nate Weisberg, who needs no introduction.
Hello, everyone. Actually, I don't need this one. Here. Okay. Good morning, one and all. Welcome to the KOH. So we're going to be talking today about the lives of women in ancient Israel. This is it's a difficult topic to talk about for a couple of reasons. One is we lack good sources generally for what life was like in ancient Israel. We have one primary source from ancient Israel, and you guys all are familiar with that source. It's the Torah. Talmud comes later. The Talmud is more Roman era. We can, by looking at the Talmud, infer some things about the more distant past, and we do draw on the Talmud somewhat as one of our sources to put this presentation together. Because, of course, the Talmud is codifying oral law, which was much older than the written Talmud. And we can tell by what laws the Talmud mentions what kind of behavior they're trying to regulate, and we can infer things that are from the much distant past. But as far as looking directly at women's lives in ancient Israel, our sources are the Torah. We have some archaeological evidence, and we can look at other societies in the area. We can look at ancient Mesopotamia, from which we have a lot more in the way of written sources, and we can compare, say, the Code of Hammurabi to Jewish law and the Torah and look at how things are similar and different. We can make other kinds of guesses as to similarity. There's some really interesting parallels in Assyrian law and things along those lines, but it's really just difficult to find things. So that's one difficulty. Another difficulty in putting this presentation together is that it is an incredibly vast topic. Women's lives in the ancient world, or even in one part of the ancient world, is the kind of thing you take a semester-long class on in graduate school as an introductory course. So we are attempting to cover a very broad topic in an hour. Maybe a little longer. We'll see how much patience people have. So that there's also that. And then on top of that, women's history is a very new field. Women's history really starts as a modern discipline in the 1980s. And before that, women's history tends to look like biographies of famous women or histories of women's rights movements, attempts to really look at how women lived and how they experienced life in different periods of history doesn't really start until the 80s, and the really good stuff doesn't start until the 2000 aughts and the 2010s, at which point we're into my wife writing her thesis, and things become extremely contemporary. This is a synthesis of a very big topic using limited sources. But we're gonna let's try and sink our teeth into this, shall we? Because this is an important thing to talk about. Where are we? Yep, there we are. Oops, I skipped it. Okay, terms. Wanted to start with some basic vocab. The first one is agency. Agency is a concept that shows up a lot in history outside of women's history. So it'll come up again. In fact, it's kind of come up in the past in some of the other topics we've spoken about. And agency is how people who have limited rights, limited freedoms, limited control over their lives, they're not powerless. We're talking about women's history today, so we're going to be talking about how even in a situation where women have a limited amount of autonomy, they still have some autonomy. There are still ways that they can control their lives and assert their individuality, and if they're faced with problems, that they can try and address those problems. They're not entirely powerless, and that is something we are going to emphasize. And that kind of thing also comes up like when I'm talking about like peasants or something, or a conquered people, or slaves, or any group of people who have a limited degree of freedom, questions of agency come up. And that's important. More specifically, to women's the women's history we're going to be talking about today. Have you guys heard of the concept of a bride price? Okay, good. Yeah, then I don't need to go into it too much. It's when there's a betrothal between a prospective bride and a groom. The groom is paying a bride price to the bride's family or to the bride herself, and a dowry is when the marriage happens. The dowry is the wealth. It can be money. It can be some goats, or it could be tools. That the bride's father pays the bride, because when she gets married, all her property becomes her husband's property. So the dowry is the wealth the bride brings into the marriage, usually with the expectation that her husband is going to be able to make some kind of use of it. Although, as we'll see, there's a greater degree of complexity to that. Any questions about these terms? No? Cool. Oh, yes. Can you pass the microphone over to Dwight? Go ahead, Dwight.
I'll hold it.
You'll hold it? Okay. All right. Childhood. So this is a general fact about pre-modern societies. We see it in the ancient world. We see it in the medieval world. Really, it's true up until relatively recently, until, goodness, the 1800s. And that is, most children die before they become adults. If you look at numbers from different pre-modern societies, and historians and archaeologists have looked very closely at this, and this is something we can study even when there aren't good written records, because we can see skeletons in the ground. Youth mortality rates are almost always about 50%. They can rise as high as the low 60%. They can fall as low as the low 40%. But in almost every human society in human history, wherever you are, before the 1800s, about half of all children die before they reach the age of 15. Today,
and a huge amount of those are very, very young children, under 5.
Absolutely, yeah. Disproportionate, those are very little ones, but they can also include older children. Today in the modern world, in the 21st century, the country with the highest youth mortality rate is the country of Niger in Africa. They currently have a youth mortality rate of 15%, which is incredibly low compared to most of human history. Just to emphasize that when we're talking about societies in the ancient world, we're talking about societies that are radically different in ways that are really hard for us as modern people to comprehend. The youth mortality rate in anywhere in the Western developed world is a fraction of 1%. In the worst part of the, the developing world, it gets up to 15%. In ancient Israel, it would have been around 50%. So this leads to certain obvious elements of demography. If half of all...
Just to chime in again, and this is not including, like, miscarriage. It's not including stillbirth. It's born live children. Half of them die.
Yes. Absolutely. And so if half of all the children are dying before they reach adulthood, and we're defining adulthood quite young and at the age of 15, then that means that, one, people are having lots and lots of children. Your typical family isn't a huge family with 8 or 10 kids in it. Your typical family has about 4 kids in it, because they're going to have had around 8 to 10 kids, but remember, half of them are dying. And so you usually only have a handful at any one time. But the general population is going to be half composed of children. It has to be, in order for enough children to reach adulthood to keep the population stable so it doesn't decline. So starting in early for the experiences of girls, there are lots and lots of young girls everywhere. They make up about 1/4 of the general population are girls below the age of adulthood. If half your population is children, then children don't really have a childhood the way we think of it. The general attitude is that children are miniature adults, because you just can't spare enough adults to provide childcare if half your population is composed of children below the age of adulthood. So your girl growing up in ancient Israel, as soon as she is old enough to start doing some kind of work to contribute to the household and to the family, she is going to be working. And that starts around the age of 3 to 5. Of course, she's not doing, the same work adults are doing at age 3 to 5. She may be broadcasting. You guys know what we mean by broadcasting in this context? The original meaning of the word broadcasting in a farming society, the adults, usually father, uncles, brothers, whatever, they go through and plow the field. And then a child goes along behind the plow, sticking a hand into a bag of seeds, scattering those seeds into the furrow left by the plow. That's the original meaning of the word broadcasting before radio. That's something a child can do. They may be helping with certain types of food prep once they start having the hand-eye coordination to do that. They'll be helping provide child care for infants, for even younger children. And one thing a lot of these young girls will be doing as soon as they learn is they'll be spinning. They'll learn how to use a spindle so they can spin fibers from wool or flax into thread. And of course, boys are doing this too.
And it's not a spinning wheel like you're thinking of like in Snow White. It's a drop spindle, which is a little thing they can do while they're out playing, really, or walking around.
Yes. There's a gendered aspect to spinning. It's seen as more of there's more of an emphasis on the idea of girls and women doing this, but boys and men will be doing it too. But yeah, it's imagine a sort of like almost a dreidel, kind of a spinning thing, and it's sort of at the end of a line, and they're going like this. It's a very simple kind of work, and yeah, and that's just sort of the most common sort of background labor when you're not working on a farm doing agricultural work. Is you're in textile production, spinning fibers into thread. And so that's what their childhood looks like as children. If they survive, which half of them don't, and most of those half who die are really dying as infants or very small children, then as soon as you're old enough to work, you are working. Now, I don't have a lot of good images from ancient Israel. One, because we come from a culture that doesn't do images of human beings quite so much, and also partly because of how long ago it was. But I can show images from other periods and related societies. This is a photograph from the early 20th century of Jews in Greece. And they're working on a farm growing wheat. And you can see, one, during times when you need everyone working on the farm, like the harvest, everyone is working. And this includes children. We've got at least 3 generations of women right here, including girls clearly below the age of puberty, working in the harvest, collecting wheat because they can, and the family needs them to. Any questions about this? No? Cool. Let's keep going. Oh, all right. I have the clicker. There's like a delay after I click it. All right. Childhood ends almost always with marriage. Marriage in ancient Israel ideally is happening in the late teens. In practice, it often happens later. For women, the age at which you're getting married is determined by puberty. Now, we shouldn't be thinking about puberty at the same age as when it happens in our society. Puberty happens quite young in modern society because girls are getting, well, they're getting enough food. They're getting the nutrition they need, and so they develop quicker. And so girls tend to hit puberty, they can be as young as 9 or 10. Often it's around 11 or 12, maybe 13. For women in ancient Israel, they would have reached puberty around their mid-teens, maybe even late teens, 15, 16, something around that. There is often an impression many people have that in the ancient world, people married extremely young, and that in particular, girls married extremely young, often to men who were much older than them. This could happen, it very rarely did. It wasn't typical. while, say, a girl at the age of 12 marrying a man who was 40 might occur. If it does happen, it's usually because the man in question is wealthy, he's powerful, and he wants an additional wife, or maybe they're both from important families, and some kind of political alliance between aristocratic families is happening there. For your average peasant, which is what most people are, girls are getting married, or women are getting married at a younger age than the men they're getting married to, but it's not a huge gap. What's going to be typical is a young woman in her mid or late teens, 15, 16, 17, 18, marrying a man who is in his late teens or early 20s. That's what's going to be normal. Like I say, for women, marriage age is dictated by puberty. For men, it's dictated more by economic questions. If you're a man and you want to get married, you have to be able to afford a bride price. If you can't afford a bride price, well, that makes getting married much harder. At this point, we're dipping into the Talmud. By the time of the Talmud, there's a big controversy going on about bride prices. And you've got the rabbis expressing concerns that men aren't getting married because they can't afford bride prices, and that there's these economic issues preventing young Jewish people from getting married and thus from having children, and that this may impact the successful survival of the Jewish people, and that they see this as a very serious crisis that needs addressing. And the result is that the rabbis in the Talmudic period find ways to interpret the bride price so as to make it as low as possible and as unimportant as possible, to try and eliminate it as a barrier to marriage. And does anyone know what the bride price looks like in modern day Jewish marriages? The ring. Traditionally, men didn't have a wedding ring in Judaism, and only a woman did, and it was a ring paid for and provided by the groom. There's also a reason, it's also why traditionally, we don't always follow this tradition anymore, but it's also the reason why traditionally wedding rings in Judaism don't have stones in them. They're all gold or all silver, because for legal reasons, this is the bride price that I am paying the bride. We need to know what the value is of that ring. It has to be above a certain minimum value, and it's much easier to assess the value of a ring if it's a solid piece of one kind of precious metal than if there's stones in it or multiple metals or things like that. Now, obviously that's the rabbis talking during the period of the Talmud, but this tells us that the bride price was a much older practice, and that the question of being able to afford that bride price would have been an important one for men in the past. This is also the way. These bride prices are also a way that husbands are saying to the bride and to her family, really to her father, I will be able to provide for this woman. Look, I am wealthy enough, I am successful enough, I'm a good farmer, or my farm is successful, or I'm an artisan, I'm successfully producing shoes or tools, or whatever it is you're making as an artisan, that I will be able to provide for her. I'll be able to provide for your grandchildren that we have, and I'll be able to provide for you and your family in a time of crisis. Who is here for our last talk about money and the Jew? Good. Do you guys remember how we talked about how peasant families relied on these social ties between them to support each other? Marriage is a major, major part of that. And we'll talk about this again, but on a later slide, but a big part of marriage is we are forming an alliance between your family and my family, and among other things, that means that if we're in crisis, we can reach out and call on you to help us, and if you're in crisis, you can reach out and call on us. And so things like bride prices and dowries are a way of saying, my family is a valuable ally for you to have in times of crisis. All right. In theory, when a woman marries, all of her possessions become her husband's property, except for one thing. Anyone know what that one thing is that a woman has that's still her legal property in Judaism when she gets married? It's not her wedding ring. her ketubah. Her ketubah is her only piece of property that doesn't become the ownership of her husband, because the ketubah lays out her rights in the marriage, including her economic rights and the things her husband has to provide her. Anyway, so in theory, this is her husband's property, but in practice, it wasn't always the case. We have an account here from this is from a Jewish marriage in the Greek period, so post-Alexander the Great, pre-Roman Empire, in which a husband declared that he would not take his goods and possessions from his wife. So in theory, her property, her dowry that she's bringing to the marriage is his, but he's saying, I'm not going to take it from you. This is part of like a prenuptial agreement they're making, that she gets to keep her property and manage it. We know this wasn't terribly unusual. If you're familiar with Ashes Chayil, it refers to a woman managing a household, and women, especially women from wealthy families who were marrying into wealthy families, often had considerable economic power and a lot of authority over the wealth they brought with them to the marriage. And the penalty that this husband is agreeing to if he does take his wife's property away is that he'll pay 200 shekels, which is a prohibitively huge amount. This is a society that almost never uses money, and so that's essentially banning him from being able to access his wife's property without her agreement. And that kind of thing would not have been terribly unusual. We see similarities to this in other legal codes, other practices of other people in the ancient Near East. What was it about the Code of Hammurabi that
just that there's also protections
Yes.
in other places in the Near East, in codified law.
Mm-hmm. Other protections for a woman, for her property, for what happens to her if she were to leave the marriage, and she gets her property back, or she gets an extra payment. But we'll talk about that more in detail in a second. And then my final note is just what we spoke about earlier. Marriage for these people is very much an economic transaction. You sometimes get, and again, we'll come back to this, you sometimes get modern people looking at rules of marriage in the ancient world and saying, gosh, that looks very cold, or it seems to reduce the woman or sexual access to her down to like a possession to be bought and sold. And the answer is that for ancient people, in ancient Israel as well as in other ancient societies, marriage is about survival. It is about economic survival and like literal survival, as in not dying. You're marrying to pool your resources, including the resources of labor, including the social ties from both respective families. So if your new family is in trouble, they can call on either the wife's family or the groom or the husband's family. A big part of that is rooted in money and economics and what are you bringing, and are you bringing enough to this marriage? And if you can't offer enough, if this husband doesn't have any useful skills, if there's another man who's a potential husband who is wealthier and has more stuff, if there's a different wife, well, marrying into her family would be a lot more useful for us to be friendly with. Well, are you going to go with the person you like more or you find more attractive, or are you going to go with the person who offers a greater chance of you literally surviving and your children literally surviving? You can see why people make the decisions they make. All right, any questions before we move on? I see some questions. Yeah, yes, Joan.
How is there just one wife? Or can there be more than one wife?
Excellent question. Can there be more than one wife? And so the answer is yes, but not usually. So polygamy is, was that what you were going to ask, Dwight? Yes. Mm-hmm. So no. So polygamy absolutely existed in ancient society, ancient Israel. It's mentioned repeatedly in the Torah. There's a number of rules about it. Much later, rabbis in Ashkenazi Judaism rule that you can only have more than one wife if you love them all equally. And that since this is impossible, it effectively banned polygamy for Ashkenazi Jews. But that comes much later. In practice, polygamy is extremely rare for a very simple reason. Anyone know what that simple reason is that makes? Yeah, Jay? Yeah, economics is a big one. If you want to have multiple wives, you need the money to pay multiple bride prices. You need the money to support these wives. You got to be able to feed them and house them and all sorts of things. And while a wife is an economic asset, most commonly when we see polygamy, it's someone who's quite rich who wants multiple wives because he wants multiple wives for the obvious reason, bringing in wives from poorer families. But there's another, even more basic reason than economics that limits how much polygamy you're able to have in a society. Yeah, Dwight? Yes, exactly. Dwight gave the correct answer, which is there are about the same number of women in a society as there are men. Any given human population is 52% women and 48% men, and that means you can have a small amount of polygamy for the richest and most powerful men. Kings do this, nobility does this, and almost no one else. Like almost no one else does this. And so for most women, they are going to be the only wife their husband has at that point in time. There's very high mortality rates. People tend to even if you live to adulthood, people tend to die from things. And so you got a lot of like widows remarrying and husbands taking new wives later. But at any given time, a typical marriage is one husband and one wife, even if polygamy is technically allowed. If it is a polygamous relationship, usually it's one husband and two wives. You very rarely get beyond. All right, this was interesting. Let's keep going. We skipped. All right, divorce. Right. This is something we have a lot of info about. Because remember, marriage is an economic agreement, and so divorce is very important from an economic standpoint. And so there's a whole body of like divorce law. Yes?
Yeah, and what we have is the physical paper itself, which gives us
Yes.
written sources, which we don't always have in terms of women's history, right? What we have is ketubas and gets.
Yep. And that tells us quite a bit about Jewish marriage and the evolving legal status of Jewish marriage. A lot of our sources actually come from Egypt because Egypt has an ideal climate for preserving paper. And so even if you're looking at non-Jewish history, a lot of stuff is just drawing from Egypt, but Jewish history as well. And we know that the Jewish approach towards divorce evolved a lot over the ages. In the 5th century BC, we know that in the Jewish community in Elephantine in Egypt, either partner could divorce without a stated reason. No-fault divorce was allowed. And there's protections for a Jewish woman if her husband divorces her. He has to give her a get, a written document. This is a Jewish innovation. We don't really see this in other societies. And this is very significant because it means a woman now has written proof. This is a get from the Cairo Geniza that proves without a question that she has been divorced. She is legally free to marry again, which is important to her for economic reasons. She can find a new husband, and she's not there. In societies, legal societies where most people aren't literate and a lot of stuff is being done without written documents, it is very easy for questions to be raised about does a woman actually have the freedom to do this kind of thing? But that question isn't raised if she has a get. Men and women couldn't remarry after divorce. This protects a woman from a husband who she's secured a divorce from. Maybe he's abusive, trying to pursue her and force her back into marriage with him. This is also when having that written get is very important. She can show it and say, see, you divorced me, or I have a divorce from you. You can't force me back into marriage. And it also prevents the man from remarrying her to get her dowry back or to get a new dowry when they marry. Upon a divorce, a man is financially required to provide for the woman and any children, and the woman is entitled to take with her from the marriage her bride price and her dowry. That doesn't always hold, but it's not, and it not always holding is necessarily a bad thing. One thing we see sometimes in legal history is women offering husbands they want to divorce who aren't willing to let them divorce, saying, I'll let you keep the bride price and the dowry if you grant me a divorce, which is not ideal and isn't great, but it gives the woman agency. She now has, she has something to bargain with. She has economic leverage to tell her husband, I'll let you keep these things if you let me divorce, and you can go find another, you'll be richer and you can go find another wife. Can you give Dwight the...
That was one of my earlier questions that I didn't ask, but it seems to contradict the idea that the dowry, I think you said that the woman's property, at least in the dowry, belongs to the husband and only her ketuvah is hers, but this seems to contradict, it's assuming that this principle of divorce existed at the same earlier time, then it really does have some connection to her.
Absolutely. In theory, a woman's dowry becomes her husband's property. In practice, it still has a connection to her and is often treated more as her property. We see the fact that it's her husband's property come up most often in the question of criminal cases. Women have a limited ability to bring criminal charges and to testify in court, but a husband has a lot more freedom to do that. So if someone is, say, stealing part of a wife's dowry, her husband can go to court and can press a legal case on her behalf, saying, this was my property that this person stole. And he can testify to that, and his testimony can be accepted in ways his wife's may not be. And this is another example of women's agency despite limits. They may have limited legal rights and freedoms, but their husbands can intervene on their behalf. So can fathers and brothers, as we'll see. Did you want to add something to that? Cool. All right. Divorce continued. Even later, with both the Talmud and Mishnah in effect, this principle that a man is required to provide economic support for a divorced wife remains in effect. It is still part of the modern Orthodox ketubah. I don't mean like modern Orthodoxy. I mean the Orthodox ketubah in the modern age still includes language requiring a husband to provide economic support to his wife if he divorces her. And these attitudes towards divorce are in contrast to what we see in other parts of the ancient world. In Mesopotamia, women who initiate divorce are threatened with a variety of corporal punishments and possibly even death, which tells us that you did have women divorcing or trying to divorce their husbands in Mesopotamia. You don't make laws against things that aren't happening. And it also tells us that the response of the Mesopotamian authorities in, for instance, Hammurabi's code is to punish the women and say, no, you do not have the freedom to seek divorce. Only your husband can do that. Whereas in Judaism, at least in some Jewish communities, like the one in Elephantine, women could initiate divorce and didn't need to cite any reason to do so, which suggests that some of the current issues with women not being able to divorce husbands really are more of a modern, or maybe not modern, but a much later issue, and not an original one. All right. Yes. Yeah, Caitlin. Here, can we? We know she can.
Yes. Not so much a question, but also a matter of, you'd said that these our ways of divorcing, the get was also a way to protect the woman. There were also, in the case that the husband was a merchant who traveled, there were provisional gets.
Yes.
Meant to allow the wife to sort of divorce, but sort of count as though she were a widow if her husband does not return within a specified amount of time.
Absolutely. And that's a problem that actually comes up in other legal systems in the Near East, is the question of your husband goes off to war, or he's a merchant and goes off on a long trading mission. He could die while he's away. You have no way of knowing he's dead, but you can't remarry without him being gone. That was a tremendous issue in early medieval Islam. Because they didn't have any method, anything like the provisional get. And so men would go off to war, or they'd go off to trade, and they'd never return. And then their wives could just never remarry. And eventually they adopt something quite similar to what the Jews do to address the problem.
Yeah, a wife can ask for a get. But what if the husband refuses?
Well, historically, it doesn't seem to have been the way, today. It has to be voluntary on the part of both parties. From the Talmud on, divorce has to be voluntary on the part of both parties, which means a husband can't divorce his wife against his will. It's a protection for her. And if you don't think that sounds like much of a protection, just to compare to Islamic law for a moment, in Islam, they have the opposite issue, where a husband can divorce his wife just by saying divorced, divorced, divorced. And she's then left completely abandoned. So not being able to divorce your wife without her consent is an issue. But of course, you also need a husband. And so we have a modern day problem in Orthodox Judaism with women whose husbands won't give them gets. Historically, the solution the rabbis figure out to this is for a woman to go to a Beit Din. She says, my husband is not fulfilling his obligations under the ketubah. These include economic obligations. He has to provide her with certain amounts of food and clothing, and he also has to provide her conjugal attention. Women have a right to a minimum amount of conjugal attention from their husbands in Judaism, which is not the case in Islam or in the case of any of the ancient Near Eastern legal codes, as far as I'm aware. And if she establishes this, then the Beit Din grabs her husband and beats him with sticks until he voluntarily agrees to give her a get. On the grounds that his soul wants to do the right and moral thing of giving her a get, he just doesn't realize what his soul actually wants, and so you're helping him to do this voluntarily. And for a number of years in the United States, in New York, there was a sort of a secret Beit Din, and Orthodox women who wanted a divorce, whose husbands wouldn't grant it to them, would go to this Beit Din, and if they established for the Beit Din that yes, their husband wasn't fulfilling his obligations, they'd pay the Beit Din a fee, and then this Beit Din would have some guys go and grab her husband and shock him with cattle prods until he would agree to voluntarily grant her a get. And that quite nicely solved the problem up until I think it was the 80s when one of the husbands in question reported this to the FBI, who looked rather askance at such practices, and now unfortunately it's been shut down. But that's a much more modern issue, as we saw in many earlier Jewish communities. I mean, the 5th century BC is later than ancient Israel. It's antiquity, but it's later than the period we're mostly focused on. Jews in Egypt, either partner could divorce without a stated reason. And it does not seem like husbands keeping their wives in marriages they didn't want to be in was a major problem. Part of that may have been the ability of women to call upon their husbands, brothers, uncles, etc., to bring pressure on this husband and force him to let her go. All right. Economics of divorce. So in ancient Israel, marriage is about the economic interest of the couple and both their families, which means divorce is mostly about protecting the economic interests and rights of both households. by which we mean the household the husband is from and the household that the wife is from. They want to find a way to potentially preserve the whatever alliance, those ties of kinship and society between their two families, even if the marriage between their children falls apart. They want to make sure they're not losing too much in the way of literal wealth. And they want to ensure that the wife doesn't end up abandoned, unsupported, with no one there to take care of her. There's an assumption that a husband is going to be able to much more easily find a new wife or potentially support himself on his own. And so the wife has rights. She's protected against slander. She has the get that lets her return to her father's house and marry again. You'll notice that a lot of the rights she has are related to her father's family. Something like slander isn't just going to affect her. These are societies in which reputation is a hugely important thing. And so if a husband is slandering a wife, he's saying she was unfaithful in an effort to get rid of her, that's not just going to affect her, that's going to affect her entire family. And so she has protections against this. She can... and of course, she has access to some kind of economic support via her bridal dowry, which she is allowed to take with her, or could potentially use as economic leverage to get a divorce from an unfavorable marriage. Yes. Yeah. Can you go ahead and just so the people online can hear?
While her husband's mohar, I don't know what that word
Yes.
is.
The mohar is the payment a husband is required to give a wife when they get divorced for her support. And that language is still in the traditional Orthodox ketubah, requiring a husband to pay a mohar. If he divorces his wife, he has to pay her a certain amount of money. And I believe that amount is dictated by his what his job is, how much he can afford to provide, at least under Talmudic rules. Yeah, good question. Are there any other questions for me before we keep going? You'll take it back. Okay. In that case, oh, I just wanted to add one last thing when talking about marriage and divorce. We said you might marry someone who maybe you don't like them super much, you're not super attracted to them because they're a more attractive choice economically. This is not to assume that everyone is getting married to people that they hate. The parents on both sides are going to try and match people who will get along. Marriage is better if it's successful. It's more economically valuable if you actually like each other. All right. Vows, just another legal example. This one again comes from the Talmud. The Talmud steps in to regulate women making vows, which tells us that before the Talmud, women were making vows, which is a legally binding thing. And these are vows to make sacrifices or vows to become a Nazirite. The main difference is that if a husband or father is informed that his wife or daughter is making a vow on the day it's made, they can annul that vow. But, and the Talmud acknowledges women can get around this just by making a vow in secret right before sunset. So there are ways to do this. Women are still legal actors, especially in this area. All right. So, do we have any children? We don't have any children here. Good. Because this is history of gender and sexuality. This is we get into this kind of stuff. So, Jewish law, going back to ancient Israel, is the start of rape as a concept, which is a difficult thing to get into in some contexts, because we tend to assume that our ideas about like licit and illicit sex are universal, and they're not. In most ancient Near Eastern codes, rape is treated as a property violation against a woman's father or husband. The assumption is that along with a woman comes a sort of legal ownership of the right to access her sexually, that her husband owns this right, he buys that right with his bride price, and that the father, before she marries, sells that right. And so someone, a man who has sexually assaulted a woman has essentially, it's the same if like someone went to your well and took water out of your well without your permission. And that is how Assyrian law and how Mesopotamian law and how Egyptian law view that kind of thing. Often, and we see this as well in these other legal systems, often they punish women who are having sex outside of marriage, regardless of whether it's voluntary or not on the woman's part. The assumption is it is in some way her fault. It's not the fault of her husband. If it's the fault of the man who did it, he's a thief, and that's what he is. And a woman's own agency in sexual action is just never considered and not discussed. This changes with Jewish law. It doesn't necessarily change as far as we would like it to change with our modern attitudes, but it begins changing. Because in Judaism, we have a concept that every single Jewish person, including women as well as men, has an individual relationship with God. And this is part of Judaism as far back as you go. And there's a concept of individual sin, which means if a woman is voluntarily having sex outside of marriage, fornication is the traditional term for this. If she's engaging in fornication voluntarily, she's sinned. If she hasn't, if she's been coerced, then she hasn't sinned. And so for the first time, at least from a legal perspective, the question of her agency, of whether she's doing this voluntarily or not, becomes significant. And we start seeing laws saying that if a woman is forced to do this, then the man who's forced her, he gets punished and she does not. Now we get into another interesting little bit. Yeah, biblical. This is biblical. We are drawing on the Torah and Torah law for this. Dinah does not get punished for what happens to her, but the men of the community in which she was raped do. And while Dinah's brothers who carry out this massacre are punished for going on above and beyond, it is suggested they certainly had a right to do something. One thing we see in the Torah is if a woman is unmarried, she has a sexual encounter outside of marriage, the man in question is required to support her either by making a payment to her father or getting married. And sometimes modern people in the 21st century look at this law in the Torah and say, wait a sec, does this mean a woman is required to marry her rapist? And that's not the point of this law. That's not how it would have been interpreted. That's not how it would have been applied. Two assumptions are being made here. One, that her father is able to determine by looking at the relationship whether it was voluntary or involuntary. A lot of the time, the assumption is it's going to be voluntary on her part. And the Torah is trying to find a way to avoid putting women to death for fornication, which is otherwise something that would happen to them. And the assumption is this is her boyfriend. She gets caught, she's been involved with her boyfriend, or maybe she and her boyfriend want to get married and he can't afford a bride price. And so they get involved and they do a thing and they arrange to get caught. And this either gives the father an excuse to okay the marriage. He knows they love each other and they want to get married and now he has an excuse. Or maybe it puts him on the spot and says, hey, Dad, I want to marry this guy. You've said no. But hey, we did a thing and now you have to either let us get married or be shamed in front of the community or, accept the fact that I will be bringing a much reduced bride price in the future because I'm no longer a virgin. And so this could be a way for women to put pressure on fathers to approve marriages they otherwise wouldn't. It could be a way for a father to okay a marriage between a woman and a man that he otherwise couldn't okay. And in cases where it is forced on the woman, the father can demand a payment from the rapist. He's being punished with a fine, which is not the punishment we would prefer to see with our modern attitudes, but is a way to creates a route for punishing men who sexually assault women. All right. This is a difficult and tricky topic. Any questions, comments, observations? Yes, we got someone online.
So this is going back to divorce from Maria. She wants to know, what was the role of annulment? I heard of modern rabbis stating an abusive husband did not accurately present themselves at the time of the marriage, and so it is annulled. Also, wondering if women can buy and sell property, as in women of valor, a legal transaction, when they can't serve as a witness.
Yes, good questions. Going back to divorce. Annulment seems to have been more of a modern thing than an ancient thing. Women in ancient Israel had a lot more options as far as ending a marriage that they no longer wanted to be in than women do in modern day Orthodox marriages. And so it's annulment as a way of essentially effecting a divorce without actually doing a divorce is a legal dodge that is a Talmudic era, a much more modern thing. As for women conducting property deals, we know they did it. Shows up in Ashes Chayil in Women of Valor. We know they did this. We know women often handle their own property or sometimes even their husband's property, making deals and buying and selling and acting as agents. Since they can't act as a witness in court, I mean, one thing she would do is, if she's needed to witness to this, is she tells her husband, this is what I did, and he goes to court and he acts as a witness in her stead. Or she has a manservant in her household who observes and witnesses the event. Jewish slaves could act as agents for buying and selling property, and in certain circumstances act as witnesses in court. And so this is one area in which that kind of thing would have commonly happened. All right, but back to this. Any comments? I thought I saw a hand or two go up. All right, if you could pass that back we'll get it to Jay and then we'll get it to Dwight.
It's the slide ends at the choice of the.
Choice of the father.
Father.
Just sort of
father.
spills.
Father is down here.
Spills out.
Okay, there it is. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, the father gets to make that decision because the assumption is he can talk to his daughter and he can determine, is this your boyfriend who you want to get married to? And the correct way to solve this to avoid having to kill either of you guys for fornication is simply to marry you. Or is this a rapist and I need to make him pay me as much money as possible as a penalty for him, or maybe even I should try and pursue the death penalty or some greater punishment for him. He gets to sort of make that decision. Yes.
This is a comment in regard to your description of the attitude towards rape as theft of property, maybe chattel property. I recently read, I don't know if this is accurate, that back a certain time ago, maybe even back in biblical times, the understanding of sexuality was such, and if you read the text, it looks like it, that the man planted his seed in a womb, but the woman was essentially, I mean, because we didn't have modern science, was only a passive recipient. So she was a field that was in which a seed was planted, in which case, and of course, sexuality was also seen as primarily to procreate, to have children, so that in a sense, rape was a theft of 9 months or a year of a woman's field, so to speak. Is that correct?
Okay, we're getting into slightly more arcane legal concepts here. It's a kind of property called usufruct, where you're buying the right to use a thing, like you're paying for the right to draw water from a well. If someone, someone owns they don't necessarily own the well, but they own the right to draw water from it. And so if someone else draws water from that well, they have violated this property right. A husband has ownership of his wife's sexuality. So if anyone else uses that, regardless of whether it results in pregnancy or not, it is they're violating this property right that he has. There's other stuff there too. If the woman's unmarried, then she's going to command a lower bride price. And that is thus a theft of wealth from her father. And so that's part of the argument there. And one thing we see a lot in Assyrian and Mesopotamian laws about this is the question of if a man has raped a woman who was a widow, and was unmarried, then the fine he pays to her father is lower than if she had never been married previously, because her bride price is less valuable. And that's not something we see in the same way in Jewish law. What you're saying about viewing sexuality differently, though, the man is the active partner, the woman is the passive receptacle, does show up a lot, though. For instance, you'll note that the concept of rape that shows up in the Torah doesn't acknowledge the possibility of a woman raping a man. That kind of thing doesn't show up because that's not something they're thinking of here. I realize this is a dour and not necessarily pleasant topic to get into, but it's an important one. It happened then and happened now, and if we refuse to talk about it for puritanical reasons, because we didn't want to offend sensibilities, I don't think we would be doing a service to the women who lived back then, or indeed to the women who are alive now. This is part of women's history. Do we have another person online?
Yeah, Maria would like to know if a woman slave could be raped, or did the slave owner have a right to use them sexually? She also wants to know, since prostitution was legal, could a prostitute be raped? What were the rights of prostitutes in that time? Can a pimp sell a woman sexual favors? And why wasn't there a commandment against rape?
Well, a lot of questions. No, this is good. And I'm going to do the best I can to answer them. This is not my area of expertise. Sarah, you're welcome to chime in if you know more about this than me. But one, there is a commandment against rape. We're told in the Torah that if a man rapes a woman and it happens in the countryside, no one, she may have cried out, no one could have saved her, and therefore he gets put to death, but she doesn't get punished. This is a definition of rape that's a lot more narrow than our modern definition. But there is a commandment against rape as defined by the culture of ancient Israel. So that does exist. As far as female slaves, no. A male slave owner, he owns the slave, he owns the usfrucht, he owns the legal right to her sexuality, which is why male and female slaves could not get married without the approval of their owner. This meant that he could have sexual access to her without it being considered rape. It also means that marital rape was not punished under these legal systems. As for prostitution, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe prostitution was legal under this code. Judaism, prostitution was legal in most other ancient Near Eastern law codes, and often could even have a religious dimension. In Judaism, there's a law against fornication. You're not allowed to have sex outside of marriage. And so technically a prostitute is guilty of a death penalty crime if she is selling her wares. So is the John who's buying her, because they're having sex outside of marriage. And we do have a couple of examples even of prostitutes being dragged before Beit Din, before a court, and being charged with fornication, and the court saying, well, the man paid you money, right? Before he laid with you, that money was a bride price. Congratulations, you two are married, which is, not great, but is a product of this court trying to avoid having to put this woman to death, and these two people to death, and choosing to treat it as a marriage that just needs a proper contract drawn up to formalize it as an alternative to having to execute these people. which I really think is what this law is about. There's a lot of laws that are death penalty crimes in ancient legal codes that don't seem to have really been treated. They're a death penalty because the people writing the laws want to underline, do not do this act. But in practice, they don't want to put people to death for this, and often they just don't have the ability to. Remember, they don't have our modern systems of police and prisons and courts, and frequently just can't. And so they come up with other ways to punish people to a lesser degree for these actions that don't require them to put them to death. Treating rape as a property crime enables courts to say, well, we're not going to treat this as a case of fornication. Otherwise, we're going to have to start killing people as a result. Instead, we're going to treat this as a property crime, as theft, which means we can, there are much lower standards of evidence required to convict someone. And the penalties that we apply are less than the death penalty. We see this, interestingly enough, with laws against homosexuality. This is technically a death penalty crime for men in the Torah. The rabbis in the Talmud, and they're building on an older body of case law to do this, come up with a way to say, all right, technically that's a death penalty. We're just going to make it impossible to convict anyone of being gay by having such a high standard of evidence. You can never do this. And they're not doing this because they're pro-LGBT rights. They're doing this because they're anti-death penalty. But we see the same thing with this. Yes. Yes. Yeah, witnesses are required as far as these crimes. There's questions of the number of witnesses you need. What do these witnesses need to have seen? Under modern-day Talmudic law, to convict someone of either of fornication or homosexuality or any one of these sexual crimes that's a death penalty, you would need 2 adult male witnesses, Jewish, of good repute, who watched the act occur. They can't just have seen these people coming out, disheveled from a corner. They have to have seen the act occur. They have to have informed the people committing the act that this is a death penalty crime you are committing, and the person has to, I think, verbally affirm they know this is a death penalty crime, and they are choosing to do it anyway. And in practice, you can't actually do that. All right. Are there any other questions or comments, or shall we move on? Move on. Good. We're making people a little uncomfortable there. All right. Slander court cases and agency. One thing we see, and again, getting back to women's agency, is even if women can't be as active in courts, they can call upon sometimes their husbands to bring cases for them. Sometimes fathers, brothers, uncles. If a woman's husband is slandering her, usually in an attempt to divorce her, she can go to her father's household, and if her father is still alive, him, or if he's not, whoever's the new head of the family, who may be a brother of hers, may be an uncle of hers, and can call upon him to bring a case against her husband on her behalf. And we have records of these kinds of cases happening, usually from after ancient Israel, because we don't have good records from them, but enough records to establish that this is a common thing that happened. Even though these choices and restrictions on women seem very limited to us, and indeed they are, they also demonstrate women had agency within their lives. They were not passive subjects within this patriarchal system that attempted to control them. They could bring in other men to advocate for their rights. They could use the property rights they did have by agreeing to give them up in exchange for other things they wanted. They were actors. They did things. They litigated. They waged law, as historians like to say, in courts to get rights and to assert rights. And often, laws we see limiting the behavior of women tell us what behavior women were engaging in. Because you don't pass laws telling women you cannot do X unless women were, in fact, doing X. Just to give you an example, and this isn't from ancient Israel, but you guys have familiar with the Puritans in New England and how the Puritans were like a really religious group of these Christian fundamentalists who settle in New England, and they're very big about controlling sexuality and controlling women's sexuality. And they also are big on literacy, and so we got a lot of great written records from Puritans. And these include baptismal records and marriage records. So we know who was having children, and we know who was getting married. And at least 30% of marriages recorded in Puritan New England were having babies less than 9 months after getting married. And in this incredibly conservative
this is
society.
true across. So I don't, it would be incredibly difficult to establish this kind of statistics for ancient Israel. But we know that in the American colonies, not just in Puritan New England, but across the American colonies, at least a third of brides were pregnant when they got married.
Which suggests
At least.
Which suggests to us that a significant percentage of women, even in societies in which sex outside of marriage is viewed as a really bad thing, were in fact doing something akin to dating and having relationships before they got married. It's tricky to generalize from this example in Puritan New England all the way back into ancient Israel, but it seems likely that women knew who they wanted to get married to. They identified men who were available, and even if that man didn't necessarily have the best economic situation, as long as he's got something decent, they found ways to pursue making that wedding happen, making that marriage happen, having relationships with the man they actually loved, even if there were laws ostensibly preventing them from doing this. Yes. We have a question. Let me just bring that over. Here you are.
Yeah, this concerns women as witnesses.
Mhm.
Let us suppose that we have, and I know you need 2 witnesses
Mhm.
to a crime, but 2 women observe a murder.
Mhm.
But they are the only witnesses to this murder. How is this resolved if you need to punish the murderer?
Right. Good question. Excellent question. And so we have stepped right outside the bounds of my area of knowledge. I am a much more modern historian, so I'm doing the best I can. Do you have an answer for this? No, you're just taking it. So I will attempt to answer it. However, in the context of another pre-modern society for which we have much better legal records for how to handle this, and that's in the Islamic world. The Muslim world is applying their religious law as criminal law for a much longer time than we did, and we have much better written records of how they did this, and so we can look at what they did. Because in Islam, as in Judaism, murder is a death penalty crime. And in Islam, as in Judaism, their legal scholars introduced standards of evidence to try and make the death penalty as rare as they possibly could, if not eliminate it completely. And this meant that to convict someone of murder in Islam, you need 4 adult male witnesses. They have twice as many as we do. So what do you do if someone commits murder and the only witnesses are women, or are children, or is someone who's not Muslim? But you obviously don't want to allow murderers to run free in your community. And what they would do is they would find a way to charge this person with a lesser crime and punish them for that other crime. Because they were willing to accept women's testimony in non-capital cases. This meant sentencing people to death for murder got harder, but exiling them or subjecting them to pretty extreme corporal punishments, which could and sometimes did result in the person dying. If you're hitting someone with 99 lashes, that's the kind of thing that can kill someone. And so they'll do something like, well, was the victim a woman? All right, we could potentially treat this as a property crime. Her husband or father has lost some kind of monetary thing as a result of her death. We're going to treat this as a property crime. The punishment will be corporal, or we may go to like some kind of extreme thing involving exile to deal with the person. And I assume Judaism would have dealt with these crimes similarly. They would have said, all right, we don't have enough evidence to treat this as a murder case and sentence this person to death, but we can treat this as a property case, or we could treat this as an assault case, and we can pursue other types of consequences. Of course, here's the thing about pre-modern legal systems, right? Is those systems are much weaker than the modern day American court system, right? The modern day American court system is incredibly powerful. We have an extensive police force, local, state, and federal, that can hunt people down and bring them back and extend the power of the law across the land. Your pre-modern court, your ancient court, relies on people coming to it voluntarily and asking for judgments in these cases. The court has a very little ability to police things. Do you remember the cities of refuge in the Torah? And the cities of refuge exist because if I murder Dwight over here, sorry, Dwight, we're using an example. Dwight's family is likely to come after me and try to kill me out of revenge. And the ability of the court to prevent that and to punish me for that, or to punish his family for coming after me and murdering me, is extremely limited. The best they can do is offer a shelter for people who've killed someone by accident and are trying to avoid being hunted down. And so just, what often is going to happen in those sorts of cases of murder is, regardless of what the court does, what the court does may be irrelevant. The person's family is going to go after this person and take justice into their own hands as vigilantes. Yeah, but no, good question. That's my best understanding of it as someone who is not an expert. All right. I'll wrap things up. Promise. I think we've overshot a little bit. Widowhood. So a woman's life is going to end most likely with her becoming a widow. Women have a longer life expectancy than men do in the ancient world as well as now, and often women would outlive their husbands. Across the ancient world, there are provisions in legal codes to try and take care of widows. In Judaism, we have a community-wide exhortation to care for widows and orphans, because widows and orphans are common in a society where the mortality rate is high and people may die for any reason at any time. So that we have a community obligation. There's also specific laws requiring sons and fathers to take care of widows. And is anyone here familiar with Levirate marriage? Requiring a male relative of a widow's husband to step in and marry her. You can think of Levirate marriage and these other legal frameworks as a sort of social security system. Yes, if she has children, especially if she has a son who can provide for her, then he doesn't have that kind of obligation. But the goal is to create a legal framework to ensure that widows aren't left destitute and abandoned, and to require male members of their family to take care of them and provide for them, at least to a degree. Any questions? Okay. And then we're going to end with inheritance, and that is both in other types of ancient Middle Eastern law and in Israelite law, women are able to inherit from their fathers. In fact, in some ways, the wife under Jewish law, under ancient Israelite law, has more rights to inherit the property of a father or a husband than in other legal systems. Hammurabi's code requires a father to specify in writing before his death that he wants his daughter to inherit, or she doesn't. Whereas we find cases of women going to Moses and saying, our father has died without sons. What do we get of his inheritance? And Moses ruling that yes, you get to inherit. And we also have marriage documents stating if a husband dies without a male or female child, the wife has power over his entire property and inherits it. Often the most powerful and important women in ancient society were widows who had inherited their husband's property. All right.
And that's true outside of the
Yes.
ancient world. That's true in the medieval world. That's true in the early modern world. Because they're eventually we actually get a term for it, a legal term for it, femme sole, that appears in like in the American colonies and stuff, because they're able to act as their own agents in terms of business without any male overseeing any of it. Femme sole, it's Latin, woman alone.
Yes, Mr. Weisberg. Let's give you this.
Well, I wanted to stir a little anthropology into the discussion.
Please do.
Because backing up a little bit, my memory of this, of course, going back pretty far to my undergraduate days, was that courtship is very particularized as to different societies. And it strikes me that the courtship rituals that accompany a given society are very, very particular. And whether you're in colonial America or ancient Israel, you do have these mores that surround these ways. And of course, what we have in the modern day is completely different and rather recent in our approach to courtship. So going back, I'm a little bit uneasy with the idea when you look at the numbers that Sarah quoted, that 30% of marriages in colonial America, and maybe extrapolating from that and saying that that's not uncommon, that saying that therefore gives you an idea that there was a lot of voluntary coupling going on before marriage. I don't know, given the particularized courtship behaviors and rituals in these different societies, if it was all that voluntary. I wouldn't assume that. I would think that given that reality, it's likely that a lot of the women who wound up being pregnant at marriage, that this was coerced on them, and this might have been the easiest way to resolve it without a lot of societal conflict, was that they would marry. But to assume that there was all this voluntary coupling going on, I don't know that I'd go there from that statistic.
You're raising issues with the word voluntary in there, I know that's a reasonable issue. I mean, we are getting once again into the limits on the data. Our data from Puritan New England does not tell us much about the voluntary nature of these marriages, to what degree, and I mean certainly, and I think it goes without saying that at least some of these marriages were two people who were in a relationship but may not have wanted to take that relationship to the level of marriage, and then got pressured into marrying as a way to avoid social discord and a way to force them to meet societal norms. I mean, I told you of the example earlier of a court case of a prostitute being dragged in front of a Beit Din, and the Beit Din saying, actually, you married that customer of yours. Certainly, she didn't want to marry that guy. She's being forced to marry him as an alternative to being put to death, which is not at all great by our standards. And it is impossible to really know all of this for sure. We don't have the kind of written records we do from Puritan New England for really any societies before Puritan New England. And so this forces us to make a lot of guesswork as to how common this kind of stuff is. We know that sex outside of marriage was happening in ancient Israel because you wouldn't have laws against sex outside of marriage unless it's happening. You don't make rules about things that aren't going on, and you don't have religious leaders preaching about the sinfulness of this and the issues of this unless it's an issue. And we see repeatedly in the Torah issues of men were sleeping with these women, these Moabite women in the desert, and so God sends a plague, or there's other examples than just that that come up, and so clearly it was happening. The question is, how extensive was it? How voluntary was it? At what point were women being forced into marrying men they didn't want to, simply to, brush this under the rug? And I'm sure some of that was happening. But I'm equally sure that a lot of voluntary relationships were happening. Parents don't want to force their daughters into marriages that will make them terribly miserable and unhappy. Not usually. They want their daughter to be safe and financially secure and not have to worry about where her meal is coming from. Same deal with their grandchildren. But they also don't generally want her to be beaten. They want the marriages their children are having to be successful. And so there is going to be an effort to try and make sure that the people getting married are going to at least be able to tolerate each other, if not like each other. And I don't think my reading, which I didn't originate, my reading of the law that granted a father the ability to decide whether or not to have his daughter marry a man she's had a sexual encounter with. I don't think I'm wrong to read that as you're asking the father to determine, is this voluntary on their part or not? Is entirely wrong. Certainly, there is you guys know how we have an issue in our society today, the Me Too movement. There's continue to be issues with men with power and authority taking sexual advantage of women, but most men and men with power and authority in the ancient world absolutely took sexual advantage of women all the time. But there's a lot of men who don't have much power and authority. Most people are like us. They had loves, they had passions, they had relationships with people. They formed they saw someone and thought, gosh, that person is attractive and good looking, and I like talking to them, and I want to get to know them better, and one thing leads to another. I don't think that was unknown. I'll take 2 more questions, and then we've been running a bit over late, and then we will end things. Anyone else have a question? Sure. And then we'll get to high.
Okay. Well, this is talking about all these relationships and love and everything, but in ancient societies, women were considered inferior, not only physically, but also their ability to reason, and to understand and develop ideas. And so I don't know whether or not it's a little difficult to understand how a man would develop a relationship with someone he considered intellectually inferior to him.
Some of that stuff comes later. A lot of this stuff is philosophers writing. For ordinary people, remember, most people are peasants. Most people are living constantly on the edge of survival and starvation. When you are in those conditions where survival is like a real challenge,
valuing this person who is able to
give you the microphone.
Yep.
They're valuing this person who is able to contribute to the household in ways they cannot, right? Because in order to be for survival of their family, right, to have children, to have the next generation, and they're a woman who is educating those children. Whether that education might look like our education, of course it doesn't. It looks like teaching them skills for how to run a household and a farm, but they're incredibly important skills because they're teaching them how to survive.
And that means you respect the other person because you're relying on their skills partly for your survival. Even if men viewed women as inferior, and certainly they were in terms of like social status and legal status. That didn't mean you didn't respect the women in your life, your wife, your mother, your sisters, the women you saw around whose labor was necessary to keep you alive, and you knew it was necessary because you were doing the same
And
labor.
one of the things that changes later in like the 17 and 1800s, and then we get that modern idea about who is doing what jobs. In the ancient world and in the medieval world, women were the ones who were also doing a lot of the medicine. They're the people that are keeping people alive in more ways than just giving birth. Like they're not just sustaining the population in that regard, they're also sustaining the population they're the ones that do a lot of the cooking. They're the ones that do a lot of the medicine. They're taking care of people when they are sick. They're taking care of people when they are old. All of those different things are in the women's realm of what they're doing. And those things are incredibly valuable to people in the ancient world, even if they aren't legal.
They're also feeding people. Almost everyone is a farmer. If you're doing a harvest, everyone is out on the farm harvesting.
Including the women.
Yes, including the women. And so the men know how important that is. They know how important the women's labor is because they're doing the same thing at the same time. Otherwise, everyone starves.
And in the winter, when you're not out farming, the reverse is kind of true. The men came in and spun wool into thread. We don't think about that, but nobody was idle in the ancient world. So when there was a harvesting task to do, you harvested. It did not matter your gender. And when there wasn't, you did the other things that were necessary for survival.
Yep. Thank you. And I'll give this to Hai, and then we'll end. I'll hang around a little while afterwards if anyone has any additional questions for me.
First of all, I want to thank you for bringing this presentation here.
You're very welcome.
I'm sure that this was the wish of the folks that started this whole situation here, that it's fascinating what we're finding out. However, when we're looking at a past situation, everything is different. When you look from A to Z, every single thing is different. There are people that are walking around with a device in their pocket, and they look at that device 24 hours a day. Every single thing they do from the time that they wake up, they go to sleep, and they're influenced. They're influenced that, basically speaking, it doesn't matter how many newspapers you have in the world or how many scribes you have, it doesn't even come close to the information that's in every second and every minute of good, bad, or indifferent, okay? So the key is, it's always, it's something to take a look at what it is, whether it's mortality or whatever it is. This is something that happened at a time a long, long time ago, okay? And whether we believe that some of those truths should be used today or not, that's an individual. But all these things that we have right now, go into courts, go into publications, everything that we saw before. There was a guy that had this farm, so maybe he had like 50 cows, and he had 6 horses, and he could only go with the horses maybe 20 miles, or else the horse would die. And that was his life. All the things that we saw here, it's fascinating that we look at this past and we try to find something that's similar. Nothing is similar. Nothing is similar unless there is a man who is out there and he loves this beautiful wife and he tells her all kinds of beautiful things because he's really in love. And that exists today, but it exists under different conditions. And these conditions that are bringing forward here, thank you for bringing them around, because some of them are laughable and some of them are tragedy, okay? Because basically speaking, like that my father was born in this mythical town in Poland called Chelm, where people laughed about things or whatever it is, and my mother came from the Ukraine, from a whole different situation, but the conditions were so different. everything was different. So we can say that it's really a pleasure, sir, for you bringing these things together, whether it's fantasy or whether. And it's my wish that this library brings in 7 times as many people to listen to you, okay? Because that was my wish at a starter. And hope that everything that runs out here, that we have these lovely opinions and let them stand as opinions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Hi. That's much appreciated. I'm gonna.
Get papers?
Thank you. I'm just gonna end. I hope to see you guys back at the next one. We're going to get into a weirder topic. That's also, I think, kind of important. The next talk I'm going to be giving is going to be about something called postmodernism and what it does to Jewish history. And if you're not sure what that is, ask yourself who's Jewish and how do we define being Jewish, and you'll see and how does that affect our understanding of history. So that's what I'm going to talk about next time. And I just wanted to thank my wife Sarah. This is mostly her work. I'm just delivering it. She put this together. Thank you guys all for coming. Thank you.